One way to think about irony is as a structural device because it involves contrasts, particularly a contrast between the expected and the actual. So if you follow what happens to Lady Macbeth across the play, you can see some echoes that bring out some of the main points about her as a character. In her first scene, Act 1, Scene 5, we see her in joyous expectation of the future. And then in her last, Act 5, Scene 1, we see her stuck in the past, horrified by her guilt. That's just one of the contrasts that you might want to bring up in an essay about her across the whole play. She begins by thinking that guilt is just skin deep and they can wash off Duncan's blood and forget all about it. But she ends unable to thoroughly clean her hands, realising that what's done cannot be undone. In fact, so focused is she on her guilt that in all but the last of her 6 speeches in Act 5, she is focused on her bloody hands. She also begins by talking about night, wanting it to conceal her actions. She prays for darkness, come thick night. But at the end, she wants light by her continually because she's terrified of it. She asks the spirits to thicken her blood, to stop her conscience, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose. This suggests she thinks her conscience is something materialistic or physiological. At the end, though, the doctor correctly points out that her real problem is spiritual, not physical. More needs she the divine than the physician. You'll remember that she prayed to lose her femininity, unsex me here. But at the end, her obsessive focus on cleanliness, her fear of the dark, and her desire for comfort, wanting to hold hands, might suggest that, in fact, she is unable to do that. You might be thinking that saying that being afraid of the dark as a feminine characteristic is sexist, but the data on it is pretty clear. Women self-report greater fear of the dark, of spiders, of many things than men do. At the beginning, she feels the future in the instant, but at the end, she is stuck in a recurring past that she cannot break free from. She thinks at the beginning that it would be best not to think of the deeds that have been done because it might make them mad. At the end, however, despite that instruction to Macbeth not to think about it, she is unable not to think about it, and in fact it does drive her mad. She urged Macbeth to sleep, to fix his troubled mind, but at the end she can't sleep without displaying her troubled mind. The doctor says her heart is sorely charged. So sleep for her is not the season of all natures. It doesn't offer her any repose. She couldn't understand Macbeth's guilt, saying that he unbent his noble strength to think so brain-sickly of things. But by the end of it, it seems that she in fact assumes guilt for all his crimes, including Banquo's murder, which she knew about but had no part in, and even Lady Macduff's, about which she knew nothing beforehand. The Thane of Fife had a wife, where is she now? She thought things could be forgotten earlier, but now she's a prisoner of her memory. She said that daring ensured success and didn't want Macbeth to be like the poor cat in the adage, who wants to catch the fish but won't put its paws in the water. At the end, though, we've got an image of Duncan's body having so much blood in it. So Duncan's blood is an echo of the water on the cat's paw. She said that pussyfooting was bad and basically tried to tell Macbeth, don't be such a pussy. But in fact, what happened is that she ultimately pushed too far and found out that there are limits that you can't transgress. She said earlier that the valour of her tongue would chastise Macbeth, but now her tongue, lacking valour, is confessing her guilty deeds. She spoke in verse and expected greatness, but she ends speaking in ragged prose, the only one of Shakespeare's tragic characters to be denied the dignity of verse in a last appearance. Remember, she's also the only female tragic character to appear alone in her first appearance on stage. So looking at this then, what are we to make of her? Is she remorseful, genuinely, or does she merely regret that she can't forget? That's an important question for you to consider. Do you agree with Dr. Johnson that she ends merely detested? Often in Shakespeare, even the villains aren't pantomime villains. It's not melodrama. There's something about each of them that means they remain until the very end a mixture of good and bad. Is that the case with Lady Macbeth? If so, what do you think her redeeming qualities are? Now, one comment that I find interesting to think about her in terms of is this line about the rise of feminism in ancient Rome from the book pictured here. By copying men too closely, the Roman woman succeeded more rapidly in emulating man's vices than in acquiring his strength. So an idea here is that Lady Macbeth, in her speech about wanting to be unsexed, adopts a vision of masculinity and also tries to make Macbeth live up to it. She taunts him saying, "Are you a man?" And he talks about her undaunted mettle that should bring forth nothing but males if they were to have children. So she shames him and says, when you just do it, then you were so much more the man. She has this standard of masculinity that she holds him to, and also that in some ways she wants to live up to herself. There's an interesting essay on the British Library website about how Macbeth is a play largely about masculinity by Kiernan Ryan. I'll put the link in the description. It's definitely one to read for revision. And he argues that the play is centred on notions of destructive male fantasies. Well, what if the most destructive in the play is actually Lady Macbeth's? What if she is the most destructively male character in the play? Perhaps that would be a fitting twist on a play which begins with the idea of the witches looking like women and yet having beards, a play which confounds and confuses many categories. Maybe Lady Macbeth is a good example of that.